So here recently, Complexity has announced some new additions to their team in what has been part of a gradual restructuring phase ever since the Starladder Major, where they obviously had a very disappointing result. We had Jason Lake make that very famous tweet that had a lot of controversial opinions surrounding it. Some people kind of siding with him and his aggressive approach, and others thinking that the timing was a bit off and a bit harsh. Whatever side you may be on, it was certainly evident that Complexity needed something to happen because they're an organization that has really struggled for quite some time to be internationally relevant, or really be at the top of the North American rankings as well. And so really what we've seen is this team just kind of piecing together players over time. It kind of started about maybe 5 or 6 months ago when Obo joined the team, the very young 16-year-old player who's been now the longest standing member of the team as everyone else has been cleaned out. Obviously, the first big moves was, of course, blameF and Rush coming into the team in place of Sick and Ricky. But now we've recently also had Def and Shazam be removed from the starting lineup, and we've brought in Config and poizon. And so essentially this is a brand new team, and even with blameF and Rush, the only play that they had with Obo before they made the change to Shazam and Def was basically playing one group stage of EPL, which is basically 3 days of LAN play, 3 best-of-3s, and then they played a little bit online in ECS and maybe like one other online qualifier or something like that. I think maybe for DreamHack Open Atlanta or something. So not a lot of play there. So there's really not a lot to go off of other than what these individuals have shown us so far as players, maybe in previous teams and things of that nature, and just kind of guesswork on how we think they'll work together as a unit. And so I'm going to kind of just go through each player, talk about what they've done so far in their careers, and kind of give my take on what they can do for Complexity. And that's about it. Most of the time I kind of just take a move and I'll say this is the player who got removed and why they need to be removed, and this is the player who came in and why they might work. But in this case, because it's a brand new team, for the most part, it's really hard. I mean, again, we all know Complexity struggles throughout the last year or so and how they really failed to do much outside of that one miracle run at the Face It Major. So it's evident that they need to change this. This is how the route they tried to go. Now, a question you could ask is, did they build the juggernaut that Jason Lake claimed he was trying to build? I mean, obviously they were offering big deals and big salaries. They were going after big names, many of which they didn't wind up really being able to claim, like the whole thing that happened with Alexa B and such. And I'm sure there were other big names they went after that maybe just weren't interested in moving to North America. A lot of Europeans don't really favor doing that. Even if the money is big, maybe they'd rather try to form a European team or join a team from their country or what have you. And we also know that sometimes the track record of European imports don't always quite work out. It feels like Cirque is one of the few guys that have been kind of a long-standing European imports in the America scene. Obviously, Mixwell had his time on Optic, and there's a couple people who've come in and out, but no one's really stuck, if that makes sense, long-term. So that is something else to kind of consider with all this. And so, yeah, we'll just start talking about the players now and kind of go through that route. So we'll start with Obo. Again, he is the guy who's been on the team for the longest now, even though it's only been about 5 or so months. He obviously, prior to this team, didn't really have much experience when he played like an ESEA main and, Mountain Dew League and different things like that. Occasionally stood in for a team, like I know he stood in for Swole Patrol during an ECS bracket or something like that. But really not much experience before coming into this team. Obviously had to wait because I think he was 15 years old when he was kind of first being scouted by Complexity, so wasn't even old enough to compete in most of the leagues and things of that nature. So that certainly was a little bit of a thing that he had to kind of wait through. But now he's here. And obviously his play with Complexity has been pretty limited. A couple of online qualifiers. The only lands he's actually played all come with Complexity. It's basically ECS Season 7 Finals, the Starlighter Major, and then that one group stage they played for this EPL Season 10. So far, everything he's done has looked good. I mean, again, he's very young. He's very inexperienced. Not really sure what type of player he's going to be yet. Not even maybe really sure what role fits him the best, right? I mean, when you're this young into your career with this, little play under your belt, it's really hard to know where you fit into a team and whatnot. He was obviously the guy that we all knew had the best chance of sticking around due to his youth and due to Complexity's desire to develop new talent. And I think that, so far signs are good. I mean, he hasn't really blown you out of the water. He has had some really good games, though, against some good teams despite his youth. And he definitely seems to be a guy that maybe they can build on in the future. Again, I'm not sure what type of role he will play on this team. On some maps, I have seen him be more of like a peripheral player, like let's say B Tunnels on Dust 2, for instance, on a T side. I've also seen other maps like Mirage Mid Control, where he is a little bit more active and a bit more part of the pack. And with a player like this who's really mechanically gifted with a lack of experience, you kind of want him to be in a buddy system with like the main entry pack, like, whether that be, an entry fragger plus Obo plus an Opper, him being like a trade fragger or something, or something like that. It kind of just makes a little bit more sense because maybe you'll get the most out of him. You're able to support him better with more experienced players, and he's not left on the edge of the map by himself to, make his own decisions, have to make individual plays, a lot more responsibility on communication as well whenever you're playing the edges of the map. So I'm not really sure what his future looks like. It kind of depends on what they want to do with other players. But again, I can understand why Complexity have retained him as a player. I think there's still a lot of hope for this kid. I think maybe as he grows and develops with, proper coaching and proper in-game leadership, that he can become a really good player for North America and a really good player for this team. And so it makes sense that he's still here. And again, so far, so good, although there isn't that much to look at just yet. So it's still really hard to tell how good of a player he can be or how good he is right now. But definitely you've seen him play some pretty good games against some pretty good teams already, though it is limited play. And so I think that this is cool. Then we'll talk about blameF. So he was the guy that came in with Rush and kind of the roster move that happened after the Starlighter Major. Again, all he's played for Complexity so far is the EPL group and some ECS stuff online, as well as the DreamHack Atlanta qualifiers. So all in all, he's played like 10 maps online and then the 9 maps on LAN with this team. He obviously comes over from Heroic as the most notable team. Prior to that, he played on like the multinational Epsilon team. He did play in some Danish teams before that if you want to go further back, like in 2018 and such. But all in all, what he's most known for is his time with Heroic. With that team, I mean, nothing really big happened for him there. He did have a couple of okay finishes at IM Chicago and ESL1 Cologne. It's actually his 2 last lands with that team. He also did help them qualify for the EPL Season 9 finals to get a top 8 finish there. So all in all, they were kind of like a top 8, top 10 team in the world. Generally speaking, they didn't really lose to anybody other than kind of bigger name teams. Like they, lost some series of Vitality, for instance. They lost to an NIP, maybe lose to a G2. They did have a series victory over Fnatic. They had a series victory over Navi at one point as well. Though some of this stuff is online stuff. Some of it's on LAN, though. So, yeah, I mean, it's a team that occasionally could pull off upsets against top 10 teams, but certainly they weren't ever really beating top 5 teams very often. And generally speaking, they were kind of more of a kind of dark horse upset type team, never really expected to get a deep run like a top 4 or a big finals appearance, but occasionally they can knock off teams in group stages. They could generally make playoff appearances. And they were a pretty decent team. And what's important is blameF was actually one of their better players. Very skilled player, very good rifler, able to make plays happen, generally put up good numbers. And he was an in-game leader. And that's actually a big commodity to have, is an in-game leader who also has fragging potential. And so far what he's done on Complexity has looked good. Also, what I will say about blameF is that it feels like he's the type of guy that has like a really good head on his shoulders, a really good mentality. Like when I've heard him in interviews, like I conducted some with him post-game at EPL Season 10 group stage. I've heard him when he's done that rivalry interview with Richard Lewis. Just when I've heard him speak about the game and about being a leader, it just seems like he's got, unless it's just like some really good PR, it seems like he has like a really good mind for the game and a really good kind of understanding of what he needs to do, and he seems motivated. And I think now that he has like some names on his team that have some real name value, that's maybe obviously going to provide extra motivation and gives him the tools he needs to be successful. So yeah, I actually think like no matter what happens with this team, investing in a young player like Obo and then having a capable in-game leader who can also frag well and blameF is a pretty good foundation to work from. Like obviously you might need to make more moves down the line if you're the Complexity organization to truly build that juggernaut you want to be, but at least you have some foundational pieces here. I think blameF might be the most important piece, being again the IGL fragging combo. There's not many other IGLs that you probably could have gotten besides like an Alexa B or something like that could have provided this for you, at least that have like really big name value. Any other name you would bring on be like a North American IGL who maybe can IGL pretty well but isn't really as good of a fragger or something along those lines, right? Especially since guys like Stanislav's already gone and out the door and doing great things with EG, and then obviously Nitro's over on Team Liquid doing pretty good things despite some of their shortcomings in recent times. So yeah, I think this was all in all great to have him on board. I think this is a great piece to have. I like what I've seen so far. Seems like more of an entry rifler, which you see a lot these days with in-game leaders. Not many in-game leaders will play on the edges of the map. Usually they want to be with the entry pack. They want to be involved. They want to be able to see everything firsthand. And he does that really well and contributes impactful frags in that position. So like this a lot. So then, other than that, you have Rush coming into the team. Now, Rush is obviously a guy who used to be a really big name in NA back in 2016 in particular, kind of mid to late 2016. This is the guy who was like the main entry fragger for Optic back when they won E-League Season 2, and they had that ECS Season 2 finals appearance where they lost to Astralis in the grand finals there, but had a good run otherwise. And, this was a guy who was really building himself up with that team. Now, obviously, we all know that Optic team really fell apart later on after they had the E-League Major and then Stanislav a part of the team. And all that happened. The team really just went by the wayside for really the bulk of 2017. finally, in mid to late 2017, you saw him join Cloud9. He was a part of that team that was very successful with some top 4 finishes at like ESL1 New York, and getting a top 4 DreamHack Montreal, and having a couple other good appearances here and there as well. I think they won DreamHack Open Denver. And so they had some stuff working for them going in, and then they obviously won E-League Boston at the very beginning of 2018. And then that team had a couple of more events that were okay, like getting second at Summit 2 and a couple other things like that. But obviously that team fizzled apart as well when Tarek and Stewie left the team, went over to Made in Brazil. And then Cloud9's basically a revolving door for really the rest of 2018 and all through this year. Really, between like Golden coming in and out, Flusha in and out, Kiyoshima in and out, KJB in and out, Vice in and out. There's plenty more names you could probably throw in there that had their chance on the team, like the whole Finesse situation. Probably some other names I forgot. There were so many different people in and out of that team, and it wasn't a good environment. And he really suffered in both those situations when Optic kind of fizzled out and when this Cloud9 team went through all their havoc over the last year and a half, right? So he's a guy that has shown, again, first of all, really good capabilities in entry fragger in his Optic days. But then on Cloud9, kind of in the late 2017 to early 2018 time period when they were having their little bit of a run, he was definitely more of a supportive rifler, kind of trusted to play individual positions on T sides. It was really to facilitate guys like Stewie, Automatic, and Tarek kind of being more the stars of Cloud9, taking the more active roles, doing more of the aggression and things of that nature. He had to take a little bit of a step back and kind of play more of a supportive role. So we've kind of see him play multiple different roles and see him be successful in each one for some period of time. I've always liked him best as an entry fragger. I feel like that's when he really had his most impact and really looked at his best, his career best form. But there's no denying that when he took some of those types of positions in Cloud9 early on, he was able to be successful. Even if he didn't always have monster numbers all the time at the end of every event, he definitely would generally go positive. He would generally have impactful rounds. He always kind of was able to maintain some of his classic CT positions and still do pretty well with that. And so definitely a guy who brought a lot of value to a team. Now, with him right now coming into this team, this is a chance for him to have a fresh start with a true in-game leader. It finally seems like this roster will be stable for some time. Obviously, they've been going through a transition process when they picked up Rush because his first bit with Complexity was playing with Shazam and Def. Now it'll be with Config and poizon. Now it's going to be an international team. So there's a lot of changes still going on for Rush, which it seems like he does sometimes struggle with the instability, but hopefully things will be stable now going forward with these moves. They have a facility to train at. They have all these, big things to kind of support the team. They don't have to worry about much other than just kind of playing. So you would hope that if Rush is ever going to come back into form, this is a team that it will hopefully happen on. Now, it's still way too early to call if that is indeed going to be the case. When they played that EPL group, he did have some pretty decent games against like EU United and ATK, but really struggled against Evil Geniuses. And their online play, I don't know. It's kind of tough to say. Like, he's had some off games against teams like ATK and Riot Squad, who are pretty small name teams in the grand scheme of things in comparison to what Rush is used to playing against. But again, I have seen him have some good games here and there as well. Particularly, he had on LAN at the EPL group a couple of decent maps against Evil Geniuses, despite the overall loss in the series, but had some decent games. And I think it's still just too early to call. Obviously, again, he's only played just a handful of maps since he's joined Complexity, basically the same amount blameF has, which I think is like 10 or so-ish maps, or like 9 on LAN and 10 online, something like that. So still won't really know for sure. I was also kind of curious to see what role he'll play, because it seems like they have him slotted in a support rifle position from what I saw at EPL. Like, he was playing some of the more solo roles and kind of facilitating that way. Obviously, that means he can still make aggressive plays in the edges map whenever you want him to make a play. And obviously, if you're going for like a 4 or 5 and execute onto a bomb site, he's still going to be involved in the trade fragging mix. So you're going to be able to kind of get the full spectrum of what Rush is capable of, depending on what type of style you play on any given round or what type of executes you're running. But yeah, I'm just hoping that he can come back to form again, because I'd love to see it. Like, I like Rush as a player. He's definitely had periods of his career where he looked really good for North America, and obviously you're hoping that he can get some of that back on this team now that he has maybe a finally more stable environment. But again, too soon to call. Now, with Config and poizon, these are the most recent additions, right? Config obviously coming off of Optic, which was very briefly international team with North American players, but then obviously became fully Danish throughout most of this year, pretty much the whole year, really. Obviously, formerly he was of North and of Dignitas back in like 2016 to 2018. Obviously, during his Dignitas and North days, he looked like absolute stud. Really good entry rifler. He was kind of the 1-2 punch with MSL. Definitely had some good track records of success. I mean, Dignitas obviously had some success, kind of, like late in 2016 with Epicenter Moscow and WESG and several other different lands like that. And then North, they never really got like a lot of titles other than like smaller events like DreamHack Open Montreal and some other stuff like that. But they occasionally had some other big finishes. Like, I mean, they made the finals of DreamHack Masters Malmo in 2017. They had the finals appearance at EPL Season 5 in 2017. So they would occasionally have some big events, and he was the star player of the team during those events, MVP candidate in many cases, really big numbers, again, really good entry rifler. But then obviously he wound up leaving North after they had a couple of tough tournaments at EPL Season 6 and the E-League Major in 2018. No good events there for them. So then he goes over to Optic. They do well in some smaller events like the European Minor for the Faceit Major and DreamHack Open Summer and different things like that, but they never really could get off to any really big results except for like CS Summit 3. And that was like obviously like late last year even, so that's pretty far away. Recently with Optic, outside of winning DreamHack Open Summer where they didn't really face any big level competition, this team didn't really do much, mostly group stage exits, didn't even make the last major for this IM Katowice that they had earlier this year, and obviously we didn't see them a part of Star Ladder, so not a whole lot going there. And through all this, Config's individual play definitely kind of fell off. He had a couple of good events for Optic. It wasn't all bad. Like when they won DreamHack Open Summer, he did really well, but again, they didn't really play much. I think they were playing like Ancient and Tricked and just teams that definitely aren't of like really elite caliber. Again, he also had like a really good finish whenever they had that top 8 finish at WESG this year. That was way early in the year though, and they didn't really play anybody big except for maybe Valiance was like the one team that they beat that he did pretty well in, but obviously they lost to Fnatic in the quarterfinals. That was like the one big team he did face there, and he didn't play well individually in that series. So yeah, Config's definitely a tough one to put your thumb on. I mean, I know that Thorn wrote that whole article about how he felt like he was kind of wasting away his talent, and that he had this potential and he showed this ability to be a monster in the past, but that he had faded off and seemed to lack motivation and all these other issues. And when all that happened, Config kind of came out with like, I think it was like a twit longer or something to that effect, where he kind of admitted that he had issues with his attitude and had issues with motivation and had issues with like the effort he was putting into the game. And he definitely could tell that, that he was falling off, and he admitted that individually his form wasn't there. And it seemed like maybe there was like this whole like almost coming to Jesus type moment where he kind of realized how things were going and how he needed to shape up. And this is his opportunity to do that. Again, I don't know what role he'll play on this team, because I feel like I know blameF's going to be like an entry fragging IGL, or at least a part of the main control group. That poizon's going to be your AWP. Rush seems to be slotted in the support rifle position. So is it going to be Obo as a trade fragger next to blameF? Is it going to be Config, because that's classically the position for Config to have? Or are you going to put Config on the edges of the map, try to make him a playmaker on the edges of the map like a Shox was in the past, or a Nico was in the past? Or do you kind of want to go that route, like a playmaker on the edge, like what Simple's doing for Navi now? I'm not really sure what type of role Config will fit on this team. I personally think a blameF Config entry combo would be great. That means you're putting Obo in individual positions, and he lacks that experience. We already kind of talked about it earlier in the video that might not be the best for him. So I'm not sure how you're going to balance the roles. It might be map dependent, might be tactic dependent round to round. Either way, you're really hoping that Config can get back to form on this team, because if he can, he'd be a massive piece of firepower. Next to what blameF's already doing in the IGL position, how Obo's developing so far, and what potentially poizon could bring to the table. And speaking of which, let's move on to poizon. So poizon's obviously the Bulgarian opera, very young guy. Most of his career has been with Wendigo. Most of his play has been in smaller events. I think the way that people really took notice of him was at that WESG event that his team wound up winning. Of course, that was back earlier in like March this year. They beat G2, they beat Made in Brazil, they had a map off of Fnatic, they beat the Polish AGO team, and at that event, this dude was on fire, looked really, really good at the AWP all throughout, and I feel like that's the event where he got on people's radar. Now, he had obviously played pretty well in some other stuff prior to that, like even the European Minor for IM Katowice, when they took like a map off of North, and they had some maps against Ints. He definitely had some individual good performances, despite the fact they didn't really advance from that and do much. And other than that, most of his play, again, has been in smaller stuff. The biggest things he's played in was, of course, he played in EPL Season 9 in the group stages, but obviously Wendigo didn't advance from that. They wind up losing some games to G2 and Fnatic and Navi. And he individually performed pretty well in some of those maps, though. And again, that's kind of the big thing, is that you're seeing him at least find his form in these games with the AWP. And that's really about it, other than a couple other things here and there. I think when it goes actually in this last season VPL as well, and again, didn't do that great, but again, at least he had a couple of maps where he looked good. They also won that like Mochi XL event, was like the only other thing besides WESG on LAN, but they only played like a weak VP in that Gamer Legion team, and that was like several months ago. The point is that he's played well in what opportunities he's been given so far. He's young. He's an opper. There's not many oppers you can really get in the NA scene. Like Wardell is like one name that was being floated around, and definitely he's a guy that's shown it in the past. But again, I can understand taking a chance on a guy like poizon. There's obviously risk involved bringing over someone like that with culture shock, language barriers, being away from home, all those types of things. Same case will be happening for Config, who I'm sure he's had dabbled in that when he was in the international optic team, but obviously they went back to Europe as soon as they could and they went fully Danish. So that's tough. At least, poizon and Config aren't alone. They have blameF who's going through the same thing. Config and blameF are both Danish, so maybe they'll have that tie. But poizon could, kind of almost be a little bit of an outsider in that way, just because he's not like Danish like blameF and Config, doesn't have that connection like they have. He's another European coming in, moving into a whole new world. So there's really a lot of factors that could plague him and make it hard for him to play his best. But if he actually can fit in, if he can get over the culture shock and language barriers, if he actually is like super motivated and gets along with everybody and personalities don't clash, he's definitely so far shown that he is a capable opper who can be impactful, who can be aggressive, who can make plays, who can be a star of a team. Definitely worth the dice roll on this kid, because if it pans out, I think he could be like the next Cirque out of Bulgaria, who could be a real big star for this team. Now, with all of the moves out of the way, is this team actually going to be successful? Is like the final question to ask now that we've gone through all the players. The answer to that is I don't know if this roster will be, but I feel like at least Complexity is moving in the right direction. You have a foundational piece in a blameF who's a good fragging in-game leader. So at least you have that. You have a commodity in an in-game leader who's capable of fragging. That's something to build off of in itself. You have a young talent in Obo, 16 years old. A lot of room to learn and develop. That's a great thing to have on your team. You have a guy like poizon, again, a youngster who has shown a lot of promise at what level of play he's been allowed to play at so far. Every test he's taken thus far, he's passed. Well, this is going to be a big step up, right? And it's going to be a whole new environment for him, a lot of things to adjust to, but he is that young star opping talent that if all goes right, he could be a big piece for this team. For Rush and Config, those are question marks for me just because of what we've seen out of them most recently. On one hand, I want to get on board with Rush because I do know what he's capable of, and he's a great guy, and I think he's just been dealt a raw deal with like his last days with Optic and even his last days with Cloud9. Those were both really awful roster situations that he had to endure for months on end, and so you kind of want to give him a bit of a pass because it was such an unstable environment. But yeah, individually, he still hasn't leapt off the page yet. He doesn't maybe have to on this team, like if Obo and poizon kind of be stars, if Config can get back in form, maybe there's not as much pressure on Rush to be a star level player. Maybe he can just be a good player, a good support player, and that'll be enough to contribute to this team to make them successful. Really hard to tell, but at the same time, I don't want to jump on the bandwagon like I've seen some people do where they had like so much faith in Rush. Like, I'm a little bit on the fence. Like, I need a little bit more convincing, but I think it could work, especially if he's going to not have as much pressure on him to be the star. And then with Config, who the hell knows, man? If you can get anywhere like he was on North and Dignitas back, a couple of years ago, or maybe even just some of the stuff he did show you at times on Optic, then yeah, this guy could be a rifler. Like, this is kind of his next chance to kind of get back in shape, get back in form. Obviously, all this stuff with Optic didn't really go that well, but this is your second chance to get back to your North form, right? Back when you were considered one of the best entry riflers in the world. If he's going to get that role, I don't know if he will, but whatever role he gets, if he can get back in any kind of form, that'd be great. But the jury's really still out on whether he's going to be able to do that or not, because he's not going to be on a fully Danish team where he might be most comfortable with, an in-game leader he might be comfortable with. He's playing with, an international team. So again, the question marks are there. I think that's the really kind of the summary of Complexity's chances with this lineup. Is there's so many question marks, which is, will Obo develop well as a young talent? Like, can he hit an even higher ceiling than what he's shown us so far? Can he stay on a positive trajectory? Is Rush going to be able to get back into form? Is Config going to be able to get back into form? Is poizon going to be able to keep the type of good form he had at a higher level of competition and in a brand new environment where, again, there's a lot of moving parts. There's the culture shock, the language barriers, all that good stuff. I mean, there's just so many variables in play. It's almost impossible to pin down how good complexity can be with this lineup. But what I will say is these are some interesting moves, and they did get some good pieces that in theory could work. I think this was probably the best complexity could hope for as far as what pieces they were able to get. They did get some names that have some recognition or at least have shown some potential or have some hype behind them. Obviously, I'm sure that there were some other people they were trying to get that they couldn't. And so all in all, I can't knock them for these moves. I think that they're pretty good moves on paper. It's just, will they actually work as a lineup? Because I feel when you piece together lineups like this, when you're pulling this guy from here and this guy from there, and there's no real core, and it's an international team of a mix of North Americans and Europeans and all that, I feel like these teams have most often struggled to be consistently good and also keep a roster together long term, because there's so many risks involved with maybe not people getting along or having different philosophies on the game or all that type of stuff, right? And so that always makes me a bit hesitant. But I do think that there is some potential here. I'm curious to see how they'll go going forward. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.